Hello, everyone. I see the people coming into the room, which is great, seeing the numbers going up. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're about to kick off the webinar, Violence, Technology, and Mental Health. And while we wait for more people to join, probably in the next 1, 2, 3 minutes, I highly encourage everyone who is interested to introduce themselves in the chat function, which is down at the bottom, or depending on how your setup on Zoom is. And just share your name, perhaps your organization if you represent anything, and just feel free to say hi if you're interested while we're waiting for more people to join. And we're going to kick off in a few seconds. Okay, I just shared the Twitter handles of all our speakers and their organizations. So feel free to also engage on social media. They have agreed to for you to share that information online. Also, just for everyone to note, this video this webinar is being recorded as well. Okay, I think we're still waiting a couple of more minutes to give it like 12:03 for any latecomers to arrive. And while we're waiting, again, the opportunity for you to share any details about yourself, you're welcome to introduce yourself and give any information. And I see my colleague Anjali also gave hints of how to tweet with the hashtag violence WAMHN interventions to use. Okay. So we're 3 minutes past 12. I would say we gave it enough time. So with that, I want to officially welcome everyone today to the webinar, Violence, Technology, and Mental Health. My name is Leonie Tanzer. I'm a lecturer at University College London, and I'm one of the grant holders of the network that is organizing today's session. And for those of you unfamiliar with the Violence Against Women and Girls, Violence Mental Health Network, basically we're UKRI funded grant, and we look at like the prevalence of mental health and the problems associated that derive from abuse and violence for children, adults, but also the elderly. And we bring together a really eclectic team of people that like have a psychiatry background, a sociology background, a history background, a technology background. And it's with this diversity in mind that we have organized today's session. And it's such a delight to have such a diverse group of speakers joining us today. So I want to use this opportunity to introduce everyone that is with us today and give a short input statement of 5 to 7 minutes as a kickoff point. We first have Hera Hussein. Hera is the founder of Chain, with Chain being an online volunteer community that creates intersectional resources around gender-based violence and for survivors and victims, and works to basically improve the online experience of women seeking support. We have then Dr. Josephine Bredveld with us. Josephine is the research director of NatCen, with NatCen being the National Center for Social Research, which is Britain's basically largest independent social research organization. And she also recently finished her PhD at the University of Amsterdam on depression relapse prevention. And while Hera will focus on mental health intervention through technology, Josephine will talk about health practitioners' attitudes towards technology. We then have Dr. Emma Short with us. Emma is an associate professor in psychology at the Montfort University. She's also a chartered health psychologist, and she has conducted a lot of research since 2005 on harassment and technology facilitated through these means. And she works a lot with government bodies and the third sector. And she will be talking about cyber stalking in today's webinar. We also have Professor Peter Swift with us. Peter is Emeritus Professor in Psychology at Goldsmiths University, but he's also a fellow at the British Psychology Association and the Association of Psychological Sciences and the Academy of Social Sciences. And his research has always been very much about school bullying. And today he kindly agreed to talk about cyberbullying amongst children and young adults. And last but not least, we have Lisa with us. Lisa is a member of our network's Lived Experience Advisory Group, which basically advises us on how to ensure that our research is basically reaching those on the ground, and especially those with lived experience. And she has kindly agreed to talk about her own experience around, unfortunately, technology facilitated violence and abuse, and how she has encountered online stalking and harassment, and also image-based abuse, such as sextortion. So really, we have a fantastic group of people here. And I'm really excited and looking forward to our presentation and input statement, which will be followed by a Q&A. And with that, I want to hand over to our first speaker, Hera. And yeah, look forward to an interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be speaking here. It's one of this network is one of my favorite networks, and I love attending the events and just learning from everybody. So I'm going to talk to you about Chen, the organization that I founded and now run as a CEO. And Chen was started 8 years ago because I felt like the online space didn't have enough resources and support for survivors of gender-based violence, specifically migrant women in the UK. Because I'm from Pakistan, I was living in the UK. And then once I launched it, it kind of grew and grew, and it's now a global movement. We started off as a volunteer community because I had a full-time job and I wanted to do this on the side. But then last year I went full-time, and now we have a staff of 8. So it's a hybrid community of both volunteers and staff working together to create resources. Up to 70% of our volunteers are survivors of abuse from different communities. So you'll see that a lot of our work has all of our work has lived experience at the heart of it. But when we come specifically to mental health, it's an area where I did my degree in psychology at university, but I was always hesitant to venture here because I feel like it's a lot of the context that you get from in-person interactions is missing online. So we took a lot of time to enter this space, but I'm very happy to show you that time of thinking through those things was worth it. And we've come up with a program, and I'm just going to share what we do in that program and why we took the decisions we did and how we baked ethics into it and what we've learned, in case it helps any of your initiatives. I'm going to share my screen. And okay, so the program I'm going to talk to you about is Bloom, which is a remote trauma support service. So what happens is that we have courses in it, and I'll share the courses with you. So there are 5 courses, and they've been written to be about 4 to 8 weeks long. And they are, to help survivors with their healing. And it's all online, and the users don't interact. So we pre-record videos and we send it out to them via WhatsApp, and people can't see each other's numbers. So it's completely secure. There's no participant-to-participant interaction. We tried to recreate what happens in offline groups online, but wanted to make it more secure. And while people are going through the course through videos, they're able to chat to our team and reflect on what we're learning in their life. And our hope is by the end of the courses, they've either had a transformation or a breakthrough in terms of how they see the impact of trauma in their own life, or they're able to identify a plan, a healthy coping mechanism plan for future. Because when we ask people at the beginning, when they sign up for courses, we ask them about what helps them cope with the trauma that they faced. And we see a lot of mentions of what we would call maladaptive coping mechanisms. So self-harm, drinking, risky behaviors, and self-neglect. So our goal is to help people through that. It's not to replace therapy, but for many people, therapy isn't accessible. There's long waiting lines. You all know why that happens. And for some, they can literally not leave their home because their partner may not allow to. They might have a disability. So this opens that up to them, but in a safe way. So I wanted to share with you a couple of things that we figured out while we're doing this. And it's an area that I'm really interested in, about how do we create safe online experiences around mental health, but we don't boil down the really complexity of sort of psychological intervention. So this is not therapy, we make it quite clear. But for many people, this might be their first interaction with any therapeutic or psychological content. So one of the things that we did is we even though we know that people drop off quite, like sometimes we see a drop off in the number of people watching the videos around the 2-week mark, we still maintain the courses, because what we found is once people enroll on them, they have the links to watch those videos anytime. And people who sign up for example, the Creating Boundaries course, which for this year started in April, they'll still watch those videos, in July. So people actually go back to content quite a lot, which is very interesting, because it means that this linear approach of having like 1 session, 2 session, 3 session, even though it makes sense from a content perspective, in terms of how people navigate that, it's not linear. So another thing that was quite interesting is when we were setting this program up, we made it super secure, because we wanted to make sure that no abuser could see their partner's number. And so, because anyone can join, it's online, and we don't really vet people. So but they can't interact, which is why we don't vet people, because we're not exposing people to harm. But it's interesting, we thought most of the people who are going to come to these courses are going to be those who've experienced domestic abuse, are experiencing it right now because it started in lockdown. But actually, we have more people who are taking these courses who have already left. I'll show you an example of what these courses can look like. So if I show you the examples for this, the Recovering from Toxic and Abusive Relationships, we break the weeks down and we tell them exactly what session. We didn't used to do this before. In fact, one of the learnings that we've had is that people really find it easy to deal with difficult content. So when you're dealing with a therapist, your therapist is able to cushion content by saying, well, tomorrow we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. It might be hard for you. They might break it down over different sessions, but everyone's trauma experience is unique. So when you're doing it online, you can't, customize it for like the 1,000 people that are taking your courses. So what we've done is, by explaining to them and giving a heads up what's coming up, we give people the option and we remind them in those videos to take time out. And we start each of our videos with a grounding exercise, which turns out to be one of the most effective and impactful things from feedback that we've learned from survivors. It was also interesting, again, one of the assumptions that we had and people had was that this was going to attract mostly young women, and that's what mostly young women reach out to Chen. But in fact, we've had a lot more older people reach out to us through this program than in any of our other programs. So something around social isolation and COVID, I think, has enabled people who may have not come across this before to look for these things. We also found out that most people, irrespective of what course they're doing, or I'll start my video. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I can drop in the link for the platform so you can have a look at it. Is that most people suffer from lack of a decreased self-compassion and self-esteem because of the trauma that they face. A lot of our content, we've focused self-compassion and self-esteem throughout it, because it is a thread that we think really pulls all of the trauma experiences together. And you might have seen from all the visuals that they're very soft, very comforting and warm. And we've designed this to be the opposite of the clinical experience, because for many groups or for many people, they might not have had good experiences within police stations, hospitals, care homes, and therapist offices. So we really wanted to create an environment that feels very warm and different to that clinical. We avoided using so many of the colors that you associate with those spaces, like white. So we really thought about the experience we wanted to be. And that's one of the first things that we get comments on from survivors in feedback forums, is everything feels very warm. I feel very welcomed. Some people have just seen one of our videos, from 16 videos that exist in that content, and then come back to us through the live chat and said, like, I cried for an hour after I watched this video because I've never felt so included. And it's interesting because we're not talking to them one-on-one. The videos are not live. They see a recording of it. They chat to us afterwards. We take some of the input that they give us and we actually change the courses and we reflect on their feedback. So we send a video out twice a week. And then every week they also get a third video, which is a recap video, which is based on community insights. So someone might share their experience. We'll then relay it back to everybody else saying someone shared this, someone shared that. So it's it kind of tries to recreate a community feeling, which is so hard when people can't talk to each other. So so we try to close the loop so that it feels collaborative for the participants, that the survivors aren't just like sitting there listening. They're actively participating in their healing and talking to us about what's going on in their life. So I'm going to end with just a few more like insights that might be helpful for your work. One interesting thing, like any care that is given in an offline setting, people come to your program, your tool, your intervention with their own frame of mind, and you can't really predict that. So we'll get conflicting feedback a lot, and we have to go through lots of research and rationale to think about what decisions to take. For example, we send out messages every day while people are taking courses, reminding them of the videos that they have to see and giving them extra content. Some people love it, some people hate it, and we're trying to navigate the frequency of it and how much agency we can give, and flexibility in the program has been really interesting. And lastly, I would say that digital safeguarding is a topic that is hard because, when you think about safeguarding, you're able to glean so much information from people being in your physical space. You know where they're coming from, what time they come, how they look, how they appear. We have to rely solely on what people tell us. And we found that though there is lots of limitations on that, the benefit of that is that a lot of people who would just not feel comfortable coming to like a physical space or sharing what's happening with them are able to completely open up because they have the ability. We have their email address, but apart from that and what they've told us, we have no way of verifying who they are and what their story is. So there's a non-judgmental space for them. And yeah, we're excited to do translations of these courses in 5 languages next year. We are doing a partnership with Bumble to offer this service. The service is public and for everybody, and it runs like on a particular timeline, but we're changing some things up. So we'll be able to offer it to organizations for their users on a separate schedule while the public program also runs. I think my 7 minutes are up. I'm really excited to hear your feedback and questions and take them when we after the panel.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hera, so much. I'm a big fan of your work, so and that of Chan, so really great. And there's also a lot of questions we can address at the end of all the presentations. So I see, Kelly, you have your hand up, but it would be great if all of the people that would like to ask questions of our speakers could post them in the Q&A section, so we can address all of them at the end. With that, I'd like to invite Josephine on the floor, or the digital space, please.
Hello. Great. I will share my screen. Just a second. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, just to reiterate, I'm really happy to be here as well to talk about technology for mental health. So I know that my title in the first instance said health practitioners' attitudes to mental health. But then I guess from some further correspondence, I thought it might also be useful to talk a little bit about the evidence with regards to digital interventions for mental health with regards to depression and where we currently stand on that. So today I'll be talking a little bit about digital mental health interventions, whether they're effective, and also what challenges we're facing with regards to implementation. So what is technology for mental health? I don't know how much, of course, everyone has different experience and backgrounds with regards to digital mental health. But just to sum up, they are technologies that help to deliver support and or enhance mental health services. The key reason, I guess, in which they're useful is they can increase access. So, of course, at the moment, we're facing a treatment gap with more need than that we have resources for. And with online services, of course, more people will be able to use it to receive mental health support, and it can reach more people's homes, especially for people living in maybe rural areas or low resource settings. It can potentially give more equitable access to mental health support. Of course, it can help with personalization. So I think, as Hera already was explaining, people can interact with the modules that they're interested in and receive the type of support that they want. And I think that is definitely something that the internet has allowed us to do. And of course, you can have innovation in delivery. So that could be receiving support in a multitude of ways. Innovation could be virtual reality for treating maybe phobia, for spiders, or it could be peer support, online platforms, or other new ways of providing continuity of care. So is it effective? So I'll look specifically at depression because that's my area of research, but I'd be really happy to answer any questions about other mental health conditions as well, and other items too. So just feel free to ask. But with regards to depression, is it effective? For onset prevention of depression, digital mental health interventions have been found to be effective. So a recent study by Claudia Buntrack et al. Found that you need to reach about 6 people with an intervention in order to prevent 1 case of depression. So that's, I would say, very promising, looking at the numbers needed to treat. But we haven't found this for all online interventions yet. So, for example, there's another RCT recently published that didn't find any significant effect for online rumination-focused CBT in young adults versus treatment as usual. So for treatment, so moving from onset prevention to treatment, we have found good evidence that digital mental health interventions for depression are effective, potentially as effective as face-to-face treatment as well to treat depression. Although I should note that the study I mentioned there only has 4 trials, so of course more evidence in that would be very much needed and very useful. What's also really interesting in this field is that they've now recent research has looked at individual component meta-analysis. So that really looks at what element of the intervention is actually effective. So Toshi Furukawa recently found that behavioral activation is potentially an active ingredient for mental health, but relaxation may actually be harmful for depressive symptoms. So that's really interesting and definitely something to look into in the future as well. As I already said, one of the kind of key things that digital mental health interventions can do is they can help resolve accessibility issues. So especially in areas where, for example, there are not a lot of therapists, or where it's really difficult to travel to a clinic, digital mental health interventions can be beneficial there. So I'd like to mention the 2 studies here. So one conducted by Rita Arjadi. You can see her in the slide as well, her picture. She recently published a RCT in Lancet Psychiatry, and she looks at whether behavioral activation delivered by lay counselors. So they were training people from the community to be able to deliver this approach, and they found actually that that intervention was effective, and it was also acceptable and easy to implement. You can also see here one of the comics that they used in the intervention, and they found that it the participants who took part in the intervention had a 50% higher chance of remission at 10 weeks. The effects were sustained over time. And this was also the case for people who were living in Indonesia in low socioeconomic status communities. So they found similar effect for that community. So that's very promising, I would say. Then I'd also like to mention a recent meta-analysis from Song Fang Fu. You can also see her here in the picture. And she looked at just in general, what's the evidence in low and middle income countries for digital mental health interventions. And she found a moderate effect for digital interventions for depression. And I would say, yeah, it just shows you that there's already quite a range of studies being conducted, and that there's also a reason to suggest that these interventions are effective in low and middle income countries. So we now move from treatment to relapse prevention. So we've done onset treatment, relapse prevention for depression. So at the moment for relapse prevention for depression, we don't actually have that much evidence, I would have to say. Not so far, the trials that have been conducted, except for one conducted by Frederick Hollendare, found a positive effect on reducing the risk of relapse. But there is always a positive thing, I guess. So there is actually work now underway, the Stay Fine study, which looks at developing a personalized intervention for young people who have had an episode of depression and are trying to look at reducing the risk for developing another one. And you can see here kind of an overview of what a personalized intervention can look like. So the young people can choose themselves what kind of element they want to take from the kind of supermarket of interventions, and they're now looking at how this compares to care as usual. So moving on to implementation. As I already mentioned, there is evidence to suggest that digital mental health interventions for depression can be effective. So that's really great, but now let's look at what's happening in the real world. So what we can really see is that in this slide I just wanted to show you is that there are lots of, this is about mental health apps, but there are a lot of apps, but actually, there's even a smaller segment of that's actually been tested by an RCT. And then also, and I think that this graphic just shows that quite nicely, that there is just a wealth of apps and information available, but actually what the evidence says and does, that's not always not always there. So it just to be mindful of that, I guess. And one of the things that we were trying to do is we were looking at primary care attitudes, primary care, so GPs' attitudes towards digital mental health interventions, because we thought that, for depression, that's one of the key places where you would actually be offering and delivering kind of digital mental health support. So we looked at primary care GP attitudes to mental health. I have to note this was done in 2017, but I have, in the next slide, I have some really some follow-up on that as to what we did in after kind of now still during the pandemic. So in the survey in 2017, we actually found that, okay, there's quite positive attitudes from GPs around the use of digital mental health for depression. Most of them also said that they were using a digital mental health intervention for treating depression, mostly CCBT and mostly unguided. Still, that's that was quite promising to see. On the other hand, we did find some issues as well in terms of the range of awareness that GPs had with regards to digital mental health intervention. So you can see the table below, but just the key thing for me was that 90% of GPs were not aware of CCBT. So that's kind of really quite interesting. And then also online behavioral activation, which I just showed you, was actually found to be quite effective. 3% of GPs mentioned using that, and 80% were not aware of this type of intervention. So I think that's just really tells you that there's still quite a lot of work to be done in this area. This was all done before the pandemic, so it would be really interesting to see what's happening now. We have done a follow-up survey, not among GPs, but among clinical psychologists in Europe. So the European Association for Clinical Psychology in Europe allowed us to do a member survey, and we're just working on the results there. But what we found from that was that uptake of digital mental health is now essentially the norm with regards to because of the pandemic, everyone had to shift to a form of digital working. But yeah, it would still be really interesting to see also what's happening among GPs. But I assume that's kind of the same trend, that there's more use and hopefully also more awareness. So just to finalize all of this, so technology for good, I think, in terms of digital mental health interventions for depression, what I'm talking about, I think we can say there is evidence for onset and treatment and not so much relapse prevention, but still there is evidence. I guess we're still somewhat struggling with regards to implementation, although that's definitely been accelerated by COVID-19, of course. It'd be really interesting in the future to look more at how can we implement these types of approaches better? How can we increase the awareness of these approaches? How can we, make sure that in low resource settings, these types of interventions can really be part of mainstream service delivery, so that the most people can benefit from it, and that we kind of try and help resolve the mental health treatment gap that we have. And it would be really interesting to look also at minimal intervention. So maybe, what is the minimum perhaps that we can deliver in order for it still to be effective, so that we can reach the most people as possible. So thank you very much for that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Josephine. That was really, really insightful, and another really interesting complementary perspective looking at the use of technology in the mental health space. So thank you for that. I want to now hand over to Emma, who will be talking more probably around the negatives of using technology in the context of cyber stalking.
Hi, yes, I was going to say just that. I'm new to this network and I'm delighted to be a part of it. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot from you today. So thank you very much, Leonie, for reaching out for me to include me in this situation. I am going to be talking about the negative side. I'm going to be talking about threats to mental health through online victimization, specifically stalking. I don't have a presentation. What I have is a few words I put together. Why cyber stalking? Why do I think this is a particular threat in society at the moment? And it's largely because stalking is not an uncommon crime. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 10 men will experience stalking during their lifetime, and that's based on the crime survey figures of the year ending 2019, and it's been fairly static for a while now. Why cyber? Well, we can't ignore the online aspects of stalking anymore. Reports that came out during the pandemic and building up to the pandemic showed that 100% of cases of fixated harassment or stalking, that is where someone is persistently pursued and targeted in a course of conduct that makes them feel afraid or in fear of violence. 100% of those cases now involve cyber stalking, and that's largely because of the capabilities of technology, the agility it allows, and I think we can all speak to the agility of online applications and communications now following the WhatsApp outage and the Facebook outage that happened this week. For anyone who loves to stay in contact online, I don't know about you, but it probably took me about 15 minutes to establish other ways to communicate with people that I wanted to be talking to that evening. So that just gives you an indication of the versatility of access through online devices that perpetrators now have. So yes, the digital revolution has brought many opportunities, but it has also increased threats in terms of victimization. The regulation and the policing of online environments remains behind. It's slower to evolve than victimization or perpetration of abuse is, as in any crime, but really we're running to catch up. The work that I've been involved with really began in the mid-2000s, and it's been based in multidisciplinary teams again, which is why I'm so delighted to be here. I think the best work is always multidisciplinary. My contribution has always been the psychological perspective as a chartered health psychologist. And the early work really began looking at the impact of sustained victimization through stalking. So that involved collection of quantitative data and qualitative data. So we interviewed a lot of people, but we also looked at screening for PTSD in groups of people who've been victimized online. And the reason I wanted to look at PTSD more than anything else is because of the status it has in law. We know well-being, psychological damage is limiting in all aspects of life. We know that often it progresses to a point where people become very debilitated or at real risk of safety. But PTSD is the only one that actually attracts considerable compensation in courts, for example. So it felt important to identify that statistic so we could start circulating that universally understood impact of stalking. And quickly it emerged that incidences of trauma in cyber victimizations were very high. Also been looking at experiences of getting support when you've been victimized online. And there do seem to be considerable barriers to that, partly because of this slow evolution in terms of support and response, but also because of attitudes throughout the public and so on, that often online abuse is still seen as more trivial than physical abuse or contact abuse. The second major area of work has been looking at offences recorded by the police of harassment and stalking online, and again talking to people who had reported them and finding out about their experiences, and that in itself has been very interesting, so I could speak to that later in Q&As if that is of interest to you. I think if I was going to put together 3 key messages today that I would like to kind of, I don't know, get across by the end of the seminar, is that 1, there is a need for agility in research so it can move quickly, and the online space and technology has shown us this more than at any other time in my career. For example, we have to move fast, we have to have the capacity and the understanding of things like research councils and so on to support this kind of work. Secondly, it's absolutely essential to work across disciplines with service providers, but always to keep the voice of those people who have been victimized central to that work, because all this research, and I think the 2 speakers before me, Hera and Josephine, I think you would agree that the needs of this sort of work always has to be led by the needs of the groups that you are working with and to whom you are working to serve. I think finally, it's important to understand that victimization, when it's sustained in cases like stalking, always now involves a cyber element, and we must continue to communicate that widely so it's understood, and also it generates solutions that might enable, say, the collection of evidence, but also positive outcomes for people victimized in this way. So that's really an outline of my work, and I'm happy to park it there and move on to the next person.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emma, for the input. I think, again, a really important element to consider in the dimension of violence, technology, mental health. And to continue the more negative elements of the use of technology when it comes to violence, but also mental health, I'd now like to hand over to Peter. Peter will be talking about cyberbullying, especially around children and young adults.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing my screen. Just want to get the full screen. Slideshow.
If you click, I think on at the bottom of the on the right hand side, it has this symbol that normally looks like a presentation where you can do it.
I'm getting
otherwise,
otherwise,
if you go to, I think it's slideshow.
This one?
I can't see your.
Yes, there we go. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to talk about cyberbullying. What is it? What kinds of cyberbullying happen? What the effects are and what we can do about it. but for some reason I can't move to the next slide. This doesn't usually happen. Sorry about this. Here we go. So cyberbullying, well, bullying is a form of aggression. Aggression is the intent to cause harm. So cyber aggression can be the intent to cause harm using mobile phones or the internet. But bullying is a bit more specific than that. It usually means repeated aggressive acts against someone who cannot easily defend themselves. And a typical form, of course, is that picture in the top right there, where one child is physically attacking another. And if one is stronger than the other and repeatedly doing it, we call this bullying. So cyberbullying could be an aggressive intentional act carried out by a group or individual using mobile phones or the internet repeatedly and over time against a victim who cannot easily defend him or herself. Bit of a mouthful, but that's what cyberbullying might be described as. But is it okay to take these traditional criteria for bullying and apply it to cyberbullying? There's some debate about that, because the imbalance of power would normally mean physical strength or numbers for traditional or offline bullying. That doesn't apply, obviously, very obviously anyway, on the internet. But some young people might have greater ICT skills, and also they might be anonymous. They might be hiding their identity in posting a nasty message on a website, for example. And that, in a sense, is a kind of power too, because you don't know who's doing it to you. Or if they're not anonymous, then the more conventional criteria might still be relevant. Then repetition is a bit different. Normally for bullying offline, we're thinking of someone repeatedly attacking someone else. The perpetrator is doing it repeatedly. But in the online environment, a single perpetrator act might be viewed or passed on many times by others. So others might be doing the repetition. So it's a bit different in the cyber world. So a number of researchers and investigators have suggested it's better to talk about cyber aggression rather than cyberbullying. And in practice, that's what many studies measure. Even those studies that say it's about cyberbullying, often in fact, are talking about cyber aggression. So I'm going to talk really more probably about cyber aggression generally, as well as just cyberbullying. So what kinds of cyber aggression, cyberbullying do we come across? They can be attacks and threats, denigration, put downs, flaming, that's online verbal fights, cyber stalking, we just heard about from Emma, excluding someone from an online group, masquerading, that's pretending to be someone else to send or post material to damage someone, outing, sharing embarrassing information or images of someone, putting up false profiles, distributing personal material against someone's wishes. These are some of the great range of things that can happen. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about a project I was involved in recently called the Blurred Lives Project. It actually involved 5 countries, but we were the UK part. And as part of it, we surveyed over nearly 600 pupils from schools in London, mainly 14-year-olds. And 95% of them had their own smartphone, so they're very active on the internet. And they spent a lot of time on the internet too. We asked them how much time in a usual day do you actively spend on the internet? And as you can see, 2/3 of them are spending 3 or more hours, many of them more than 5 hours a day on the internet. So there's plenty of opportunity, not only for the benefits of the internet, but also for nasty things to happen too. So we asked them how often, or did you have any nasty or unpleasant experiences or things happening to you on the internet? And nearly 30% say yes. Have you seen or heard of any nasty or unpleasant experiences of things happening to someone you know well on the internet? Nearly 40% say yes. Have you yourself done any nasty or unpleasant things to someone on the internet? 15% admit to that, yes. And we followed up asking them, can you say what sort of things happened to you? So at the top, we got examples of things that they themselves have experienced. Many of them are quite short comments, like being called names and threatened, strange men trying to talk to me, rude comments like you're fat and ugly, someone told me to kill myself. Some are more detailed. I received horrible messages telling me to jump off a bridge because no one wanted me here. My number was given out to many people I didn't know. They'd send me horrible messages and keep phoning me. They might make fun of me and call me horrible things. They'd also make fun of my sexuality. So a number of quite longer detailed comments like that. And I'll just jump to the bottom one, examples of doing something nasty to someone else. I threatened to hurt girls who were sending death threats to my sister. I made a fake account to talk to someone who had blocked me. I was being racist to them because they were bullying me. Interesting here, all three of these, there's some kind of reason or justification for doing it, which is very common when you interview or talk to people who've been involved in cyberbullying or cyber aggression. They've got some rationale for it. It's what we might call moral disengagement. You're somehow finding some way to justify it, even though it's a nasty kind of behavior. And that's quite common in cyber aggressors. Well, what are the effects of all this? There's been a lot of study. And this review from 2020 is actually a review of 19 systematic reviews. So it's a review of reviews, mostly published between 2014 and 2018. And according to the authors, these confirmed the strong negative association between cyberbullying and mental health and psychosocial outcomes in children and young people. The cyber victims or the targets are particularly more at risk of internalizing problems such as depression and suicidal ideation. And the cyber bullies or the perpetrators are more at risk of externalizing disorders such as drug and alcohol use, for example. So this is coming from many studies and even from many reviews of many studies, very well established. Particular concern has been suicidal ideation and suicide. The picture there is actually of a Japanese couple, parents whose son committed suicide because of bullying and cyberbullying. And a meta-analysis found that being a victim of cyberbullying was significantly associated with suicidal thoughts at a higher level than with traditional bullying, so even more damaging than traditional bullying was. Having said that, these studies often find that pre-existing depression and family difficulties may be present as well. So a suicide is probably caused by many factors, but cyberbullying or traditional bullying for that matter could be a very prominent cause amongst whatever's led to this disastrous outcome. So cyberbullying is clearly pretty harmful for everyone who's involved really, but especially the victims or targets. So what can we do about it? Obviously, it's important to include cyberbullying explicitly in school policies, in anti-bullying materials, in teacher training materials for anti-bullying work, in guidance for parents, in guidance for children and young people. And there's quite a lot of this available now. For example, in the UK, the Department for Education has this cyberbullying advice for head teachers and school staff on its website. And the Anti-Bullying Alliance, which is a prominent charitable organization here in the UK, has a lot of material, including this focus on cyberbullying PDF, and there are many other websites too. There are also a lot of intervention programs now, which can help tackle cyberbullying in schools and colleges. Some of these programs mainly target traditional bullying, but they've been found to impact positively on cyberbullying as well. There's one in Austria called the VISC Social Competence Program. In England, there's the Inclusive Program, which has had some success. And in Finland, there's the Kiva program, which is also being tried out in Wales now at the moment. Then there's some programs that target both traditional and cyberbullying. In Italy, there's one called No Trap. In the USA, there's the Bully Down text messaging program, for example. And then some programs mainly target cyberbullying. So for example, in Australia, Cross Cyber Friendly Schools. In Germany, there's a program called Media Heroes. In Netherlands, there's one called Online Pest Koppen Stoppen, which is a lovely name, I think. Spain, there's one called Conrad, and in England, there's the Cross-Age Tutoring Zone, which is quite interesting. That's one where slightly older pupils work with or mentor slightly younger ones about safe behavior on the internet and how to deal with cyber harassment or aggression when it happens. So do these intervention programs work? There's a lot of them. A meta-analysis in 2019 reviewed 24 studies on cyberbullying prevention programs for school-age participants. And they found that on average, cyberbullying was reduced by around 10 to 15% and cyber victimization by around 14%. So they're having a positive effect. Not huge, has to be said, but significant anyway, and helpful. And hopefully, as we learn more about cyberbullying and the programs and what works, these figures can go up. An interesting review by Marilyn Campbell looked at what common elements there were in successful programs. And she mentioned the program's name is positive, which might sound a little bit trivial, but if you can get pupils involved in a program, it's perhaps important that there's a positive name to it, like Media Heroes, for example. It's kind of appealing kind of name. Programs based on theory, there's some theoretical background to it. It involves a wide range of stakeholders, so students, teachers, and parents. It involves young people in the design and execution of the program, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And it's flexible enough to include changing technologies, because obviously things are changing continually as new websites become popular, as the internet develops its potential. So the importance of youth voice, I said I'd say a bit more about. And Australian colleagues like Marilyn Campbell and Barbara Spears have particularly taken this up. And Spears et al. Just recently argued for using participatory design to inform cyberbullying and prevention and intervention practices. And what they're pointing to here is firstly, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which emphasizes obviously children's rights, and the slogan, "Nothing about us without us." So if we're developing a program about cyberbullying and cyber aggression in young people, we should be involving them in it. And after all, children and young people are in a sense experts on the internet. They know best what they're experiencing. They're very experienced with the kind of social networking sites that they're taking part in. And we've got models of participation too, to help us in guiding this process of involving young people more. Now, because of time, I'm going to skip a few slides here and just come to the last one. So thinking of the future directions for work on cyberbullying, we need to be aware of how the internet's changing, what's called the chronosystem. I think we need more qualitative studies and mixed methods approaches. I've mainly talked to you about quantitative studies, which are very important, but more qualitative studies can give detailed insight, I think, into what's going on. We need more longitudinal studies. We've looked at, there are a number of guidance resources available and interventions being carried out. We need those to be carefully evaluated to find out which ones work best and which ones don't work so well and why. And I've mentioned the benefits of getting youth voice in research design in this area. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. And I hope that was useful.
Very much so. Thank you so much, Peter. Again, like a really complementary perspective to this big topic of that we tried to uncover and address today. And I want to now hand over to Lisa, who kindly agreed to share not just the academic, but actually the personal experience of abuse through technology. So Lisa, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for inviting me here today. The talks before me were very interesting and resonated a lot with what I'm going through currently. So play from Course, I guess. So I'm on the Lived Experience Advisory Panel for the Violence Against Women and Girls Mental Health Network. And I have personal experience with technology facilitated abuse. So over here is just, I've just summarized for when I first married my husband, who's a perpetrator of all this. And throughout this time, I married him I think around 2016. And since then, it was always this on and off because of the control and harassment. The relationship was mostly online based because he was based abroad and I was in the UK. And I'd sometimes go to him abroad and come back after a short period of time. But he still maintained a lot of control online. For instance, on WhatsApp, he would demand me to update my location every 8 hours and just continually monitor me on that. And if I blocked him, then he would find other ways to contact me by creating new numbers, buying new SIM cards and creating other numbers to contact me, or find my family's numbers and they'll contact me, or his family members will contact me. So just this on and off over these years. And he would, for instance, deliver gifts to my address through his chauffeur in the UK, and bring flowers. And so this was happening over time, and there was just no way of stopping him. And it was just constant stalking harassment until last year, when I just permanently ended contact with him around, I think it was the first lockdown, so around April 2020. And I just blocked his numbers on WhatsApp, on the phone, everything, because I just wanted to move on and just start the divorce process. But then I think around a day later or something like that, a university, someone from university on my course messages me saying that she's received a message from someone asking to contact me. So yeah, and other people from my university also contacted me through the university group chat. So over here's a screenshot on this slide. And I was I guess I was just very anxious and obviously very frightened, because I was just worried that first of all, how did he get these people's numbers? Because I did not give it to them, to my husband. And I was just worried that what else could he be doing? How did he get this information? So then I ended the no contact, and I messaged him saying, yeah, how did he get these? And he'd say things like he hacked into my phone, or he memorized the numbers when I was with him and he took the numbers from my phone. And it just left me more confused and more worried. And then a day later, I then received more messages from people I know, not only from university, but also my relatives, saying that they've received some really vile messages, but also I guess sexual content of me, and videos and pictures that someone was sharing from different numbers. And these were all the same person. It was my ex, and he just continued distributing this non-stop. He had uploaded it on Pornhub, and how much time I have. But so these are some of the things that I think could have been useful for me. So the first is some sort of digital restraining order, because many of the normalization and restraining orders currently are for when the perpetrator is in the same country, so it's in the UK. But I thought something maybe that's a cross-border digital restraining order. So for instance, in my case, where the perpetrator's abroad, it can just let them stop contacting me or harassing me some way or the other. And the next thing is some sort of digital hashing for social media, for sexual media. So I think, yeah, digital hashing, this project is going with Revenge Porn Helpline. And it's so Facebook do this digital hashing thing. So it's this image recognition tool, and they do something with the media, so the perpetrator can't really send it in private messaging, like my perpetrator is doing. He's mostly sending it through private messaging, such as Messenger, Viber, iMessage, and also WhatsApp, and just creating different numbers, and it just seems unstoppable. But the problem with my case is with digital hashing is that he's got lots of different videos. I don't know what he's sending around, and he's only sending me the screenshots of what he's sending to others, and other people are not really forwarding it to me. So I don't really have that evidence to send over. So that's a bit complex. And also I would wish that social media sites would have more power in effectively preventing and preferably preventing the stalking and sharing of revenge porn. There are many times where I contacted WhatsApp, but all they could do is shut down the accounts that I reported, but then he would just constantly make new accounts. He would buy new WhatsApp business accounts, SIM cards, and just create new numbers. And it just seemed I just couldn't catch up, especially with my studies alongside, and it just seemed very stressful. So, and they just recommended me to contact local law enforcement. And local law enforcement, so the police, would tell me to contact the social media. So it's just like a game of ping pong, really, in terms of responsibility. And better regulation of porn websites to prevent anyone from uploading content without the full consent of the person featured in the media. For instance, what my ex did was that he would easily upload the content of me on Pornhub without any sort of, it was just so easy for him to do. And I think there should be some sort of regulation in that you need full consent of all the parties involved involved in that sort of video or picture they want to share to such a large audience on such a platform. And I think abusers could exploit such a thing to their advantage to cause reputational damage and trauma for the victims. So I thought these things could have been useful. And yeah, that's kind of the end of my presentation.
Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And I can just echo in the chat, like, it is so courageous and it's so appreciated that you know are coming forward and sharing that experience with us, and also for other people that have perhaps experienced this now or have experienced it in the past, that they can hear that they're not alone, but other people have experiences. But also your pointers on like potentially technical mitigation strategies or responses is hugely appreciated. So really, thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
To everyone who is listening and also our speakers, we now have actually moved into the more, so now that we had all the input presentations from our speakers, we're actually now going to move into a Q&A session. And just to say, again, for everyone to be free to post questions, which some of you have already done, to the Q&A function. And also there were people shared already resources for some people that have perhaps like heard something today that triggered something. So please also, look after yourself and perhaps follow up on some of the resources that we will also share in the chat and afterwards with you to make sure that like you get the support, hopefully, that you deserve and need. So with that, we already have some questions in the Q&A, which I want to pick up. Some of which are very targeted, such as, for example, I think Antoinette was asking where we can find more information about your work, and I think that was specifically in relation to Emma. But I actually was wondering if to invite all of you to perhaps give some recommendation on like kind of all the things that we've mentioned. Where is the best way to get in touch? A lot of people have shared LinkedIn information. If you could briefly perhaps comment on this as well, if they want to, and please feel free to also just say, I'd rather not be contacted as well, Should we go in the order of perhaps like of the presentation? Harry, you want to kick on?
Yes, absolutely. So I posted links for Chen and Bloom on in the chat. So we're actually launching a new website on Sunday. So the Chen website will look a bit different and we'll have a lot of the resources because we have resources in more than 14 languages. And you can get in touch with Chen, and we have a small team, so I will also read all the messages that come through our social media. So you can either email team@chen.co, same thing as the URL, or Chen HQ on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. That was your question, right? How to get in touch?
Yes, exactly. Like, because people have like also asked question if they would want to find out more. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a specific message or question for me, you can also send it to my LinkedIn or just email. As I said, we all check the email together, so I'll see it.
Josephine?
Yeah, you can. I will put my email in the chat if you have any questions about kind of the things I was talking about. Also, you can also contact me just on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'll add my tag there, and also on LinkedIn. So just in case you want to get in touch, just my email is my first name and my last name at natsen.ac.uk, but I'll put it in the chat so you can find it there. And I'm really happy to be contacted with any thoughts, ideas, questions.
Thank you very much. Emma?
Yes, hi. You'll find me on the De Montfort University website if you want to see any of the work that I've been involved in. So just put in my name, De Montfort University, and my profile will come up. Also, I have an email address which I'm happy for you to use, which again is on that profile link. But do contact me on social media. My Twitter name is @empath, so PATH. Bit of wordplay there, and I am a Star Trek fan, so I'm afraid that did play a part.
Thanks so much, Emma. Peter?
Yeah, if you want practical advice, I'd say, and information about cyberbullying, I would suggest going to the Anti-Bullying Alliance website. Just put Anti-Bullying Alliance in Google and you'll get to it pretty quickly. They've got some very good resources for bullying generally and specifically for cyberbullying too. If you want more on the research side, then you're welcome to email me and I can send you 1 or 2 articles. That's p.smith, S-M-I-T-H, at gold.ac.uk. It's also on my slides. I think, are the slides being made available after this?
With all of your permission.
So it's on my slide as well.
And lastly, I mean, Lisa, please, feel free to just ignore as well if you want to.
No, I don't have much to say. It's just, yeah, I'm open to any questions about my experience. I mean, I think my email's provided, I don't know, but yeah.
No, we haven't. So, we want to make sure but we can, talk.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. We have a few more questions, which are great. One is specifically around the cyberbullying domain for Peter. It's by Emma, and Emma was basically saying she's working on a PhD on bullying, victimization, and self-harm as well at King's College London. And Emma has made the experience that cyberbullying is much less prevalent compared to victims of traditional bullying. And they were just wondering if you think that is because some of the harmful action that take place online are seen as more normal behaviors and bullying, or is it perceived something that occurs more face to face, and that's why we consider it more important? And actually, I want to open up this question not just to Peter, but actually one question I had for all of you is, is it even useful? And I asked myself that question in my research day to day, to differentiate between the harm that is online and offline, and to have definitions like, tech abuse or online harm or cyber abuse or whatnot. So I'd be keen to hear everyone's perspective, but let's start with Peter, please.
Okay, well, it's an interesting question, Emma, and you're right in the sense that many studies suggest the rates of being a cyber victim are less than the rates of being a victim of traditional bullying. I'd have to say it's probably changing a bit, because what evidence we got is that rates of traditional bullying are somewhat going down. And by the way, I'm not talking about temporary effects of the pandemic here, but more effects over, say, the last decade, last 10 years. So in many countries, it looks like rates of traditional bullying are actually going down, not hugely, but going down, probably because many schools and communities are doing something about it now and have those sorts of intervention programs in place that I mentioned. But it doesn't seem to be the case so much with cyberbullying, which probably is going up. Certainly the EU Kids Online study, which has looked at rates of cyber and traditional bullying in many European countries, there seems to be some increase there in cyberbullying. So insofar as there's a difference between cyber and traditional, it's probably getting less. The other thing is how we define it. I mean, I talked about this at the beginning of my talk, really. If you are very strict about cyberbullying in the sense of imbalance of power and repetition, you're going to get lower figures than if you look at cyber aggression generally. But I think it's probably more meaningful to look at cyber aggression generally, and then you're going to get rather larger numbers. A separate issue is how severe victimization is. Is cyber victimization more severe than traditional victimization? Mixed messages there from the research, but some evidence that it is more severe. I mentioned it for the suicide work, for example, that being a cyber victim seems to be more severe in some contexts anyway than being a victim of traditional bullying. But that's quite a big topic, but I'll better stop there for the moment.
Thank you, Peter. And broadening the question to do you think there's a value in differentiating it, or are we actually just, creating a new thing that we can talk about? Well, actually they are interconnected and we can't look at them separately. Curious to hear your thoughts.
There's a big overlap between cyber victimization and traditional victimization. Often the same children are involved in both. And indeed, one line of research suggests that victims of traditional bullying, some victims of traditional bullying who may feel unable to respond effectively in the playground or the school might turn to the internet, turn to cyberbullying to get their revenge, as it were, on those who've been victimizing them in the playground, say, or at school. So a sort of revenge hypothesis about cyber perpetration. But certainly there's a lot of overlap between the two areas.
And opening up to the other speakers, Hera, Josephine, Emma, and Lisa, like your perspective also on like this cyber online harms, tech abuse, like dimension.
Yeah, shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Emma.
I couldn't find the put your hand up button. I never can in a panic. So rely on the non-digital hand. Well, there's so much to say here in response. Let's talk about normalization and people not reporting. I think there is a real shift in attitude that's quite worrying about the normalization of behaviours that would have been classified as stalking. So there was a report that I think demonstrated this really well that came out a few months ago that canvassed about 10,000 adults across several countries, and they found that more than half of Generation Z and millennials said they had checked on a former partner on social media, and about 11% of men in the UK, 4% of women said they had physically tracked people online, and 35% of people said all of those behaviours were harmless. Okay. Now, we know that's a course of conduct that amounts to stalking, and we've heard so eloquently from Lisa about what that means. So there's a worrying shift in attitude here that I think people are underreporting. Incidents may appear lower than they actually are. So that's one aspect of a response there. In terms of differentiating between online harms and offline harms, I agree very much with Peter. You know, there is a real blurring here. Often that victimization occurs in all those environments. But in terms of responding to it and safeguarding against it, I think we do need to keep differentiation there. Risk looks different in the online space. Safeguarding is much less straightforward, as we have heard from Lisa, in the digital space. If you change your locks, if you have an officer present outside your house, if you're being physically stalked, quite often security can be established. But the jurisdictional issues, the capability that perpetrators have to stalk online means that safeguarding is not straightforward and not quick. So I guess those are my two main responses to your question.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's really to the point and makes really sense. Like, but yeah, Hera and Josephine and Lisa, your any comments?
I think Emma captured that really well, but the only thing I'd add is that there's the facelessness of social media is both its beauty and also it's like like a big disadvantage, because it's easy for those who are not safe in person to be safe online by being anonymous, but at the same time it's easy to be abusive online because it's just the barriers for creating new accounts, they're so low, it's so easy. So I think that's the aspect that as you were asking that question, you made me think of, I don't know if anybody's a fan of Agatha Christie. In one of Agatha Christie's books, the ABC murders, so there's this whole thing around letters and threats via letters, and like the investigation, how they try to find them. Online, it's just like a gazillion times harder because it's so easy to be that. I think however, I think terming everything cyber is not helpful in the long run, because the lines between in person and online is like going to be really, really blurry as more time goes on. I mean, even in our time, kids growing up in this age that's just, it's just oxygen. So I think that I don't think it's very helpful in terms of in the long term. In the short term, we need it because our institutions are still catching up to this new, and adjusting to this new way of communicating.
Oh, thank you so much. Again, like super helpful to contextualize this. Thank you, Hera. Any other points from you, Josephine or Lisa?
I've just got some general reflections. Just one of the things, I guess, is it's really great to be here to learn also more about this, I guess, from my perspective, knowing that I've come more from the technology intervention kind of, can it help and reduce depressive symptoms, etc., and prevent onset. But I think one of the synergies I found was maybe alongside the lines of, we did this survey among GPs and found that among professionals, there's really not a lot of awareness and training on the use of technology for mental health. So I just wondered, you know, maybe that's something that could be explored more in the future, making sure that health professionals, but maybe also other services, are more aware of the benefits, but also the harms of technology. That's just one of the reflections I had, where I thought, well, you know, we found that it was really quite a mixed picture, so it could be quite useful.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And Lisa, again, feel free to skip if you.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like when reporting the online abuse, I feel like it's just taken less seriously, not only by the police, I guess, but also by other professionals, such as by counselors or other healthcare professionals. It's because I think they still have that view that physical abuse, or if the perpetrator is in the same sort of even country as you, that they have more of a harm on you. The thing with online abuse is that it's so vast. They can reach such a big global audience. Like with my perpetrator, he's reaching out and sharing this private, and really, it's really violating what he's doing. And it's and he's reaching people from everywhere, from different countries, and they're contacting me and telling me about it, and it's just constant, repetitive. And the thing with the stalking element of it, it wasn't even taken seriously. I was just referred to the normalization order like several times, even though the police were, I think, aware that the normalization order wouldn't work for me because the perpetrator is not in the UK. So yeah, I think it really should be taken seriously, so then some sort of effective and safe solution can be made.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you. We have a few more questions and we have 10 more minutes. So I really, really would love to take them up, and they're actually directed specifically at some of you. So one is for you, Josephine. The question is, you mentioned relaxation potentially being negative for depression, which is really interesting. And Karina would love to hear more. The other question is for Lisa. Lisa, the question is if you were referred to at any point to a domestic abuse service, and if so, how did you find support in regards to the provision of technology, like the technological element? Did you get any assistance there? And if you could comment on that. And another question is for Emma, which is, although under the reporting of cyber stalking and technology facilitated abuse, that this is a concern, what are your thoughts on the sector's capabilities for accurately recording when these disclosures are made? So could we address them in that order as well? Josephine, perhaps?
Sorry, mute button. Yeah, definitely. So that finding is from a recent individual participant data network meta-analysis, where they looked at specific components of internet-based CBT. So they looked at, for example, behavioral activation, as I already said, interpersonal skills training, problem solving, and they identified 76 randomized controlled trials, and they found that relaxation, and the way that they defined it, was a skill aimed at reducing general tension through induction of a relaxed body state, and the most common techniques they used were Jacobson progressive muscle relaxation and applied relaxation, and they found that among 36 trial arms, so that's quite a substantial amount, that on the whole, so to say, that component was associated with an increase in depressive symptoms. So I guess that's really interesting, and I think that the paper had the finding, but it didn't necessarily unpack it more. But I think it would be really maybe interesting to find out why that is the case, because, for example, in other relapse prevention interventions for depression, you have mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which actually incorporates a state of mindfulness. So I think it's very much about how this relaxation is actually defined, and what they and how this then translates to practice. I think it may be one of the things it might work for some people and not for everyone, which is something that, of course, further research should be looking into. So I'm happy
you.
to share the link as well to the paper.
Yeah, because the one Antoinette was asking, what's the name of the author or the study? So if we can
Brilliant.
share that, that would be
I will
brilliant.
do
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Lisa, I know you're typing, but I don't know if you would want to respond to the question. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I report it to the police, they have this thing when they're collecting the statement that if you opt in to be referred to a domestic violence service, and I did opt in and I never got referred. I just kept waiting and I never got a call. So what I ended up doing was that I just had to call myself to different types of charities, and I still got the same kind of very similar answer by each one. It was always the perpetrator's abroad, we can't help, and you're not in immediate danger, so we can't really assign you a caseworker and that sort of stuff, even though I really needed at least an advocate to go with me to the police and sort of take my case more seriously. I mean, even if it was a one-time thing where the abuser was just sharing it once, but this thing is more repetitive, and it's not really, he's not getting any sort of intervention, which is why he thinks he can just keep doing this, and he will keep doing this. And that's the thing, I didn't really get much help from DV services. I even to this day, I'm still calling and trying, but it's just that waiting period and then getting no reply afterwards and then catching up with them. A similar thing happened with mental health services. So I went to the GP saying this is having a huge mental health impact to me. I got referred to IAPT, and then I waited for weeks, and IAPT said, we're not the best service, but you can't use IAPT because it's some short-term thing. So a better, more holistic service is something else, which they referred to me. And I waited for weeks and weeks for that, and then I managed to contact them again, like because I didn't really get any sort of like callback, and then they said, I don't know, I had to call so many numbers, and then they said that there was a waiting list, and then someone else said that it's just something was messed around. So I just had to keep calling, and this is while my mental health was really in a bad state. So making me do everything, it just seemed to just feel really isolating in a way, and just putting all the work on me. And I eventually had to get, I got the counseling, but that was through my own efforts rather than any sort of like help.
I'm so sorry about that, Lisa, but I don't know if this is of any comfort, but this is exactly what I hear from so many. This is exactly why I started Chen, because I had that experience of trying to help someone and calling, and just I was just so frustrated by why it was so hard to get help, and there were so many qualifiers, and just so many people just didn't know what to do and to help, and you just kept getting like sent around. So let's definitely catch up after this because and see if we can help you with some of that stuff. I think unfortunately the problem, as you mentioned in your talk, with any online harassment, when it's across borders, even when it's in the country, it's problematic, but across borders it gets even more difficult, because in many countries this is not taken seriously. And then filing a complaint as a citizen of a country into another country is just so difficult, and some police departments don't even accept it. So the police route is so hard. Sometimes it's a bit more successful to go through the tech companies and like trying to do that. We're actually doing a project right now which is about getting tech companies to like have keep more tabs on users that are repeat offenders, because if a person has been doing this to you persistently, there's a good chance they will do this to other people as well that come into their life. So it's just, I have nothing to say, but I'm so sorry, and I feel your pain. It's just unfortunately the sector needs to do so much more when it is about joining up services together, upskilling when it comes to like cyber harassment and stalking. We're still telling women, why don't you go offline, turn off your Facebook? Like as if someone doesn't know how to do that or hasn't tried that already. If someone's really determined, they will like find you in other places. So I think it's just super important for funders and government to train police, to train judges, to train lawyers, to train like civil society. We have great services like the Revenge Porn Helpline that specialize in this. And Refuge has also started a unit that's specifically about tech abuse. But really, like it's just we are letting survivors down.
I also, thanks. That's really, I guess like many people also going through the same thing, just being let down. It's also, especially with DV services, when they when they can't really help you. It's also in terms of legal aid, especially again, when the perpetrator's abroad, you're not eligible for legal aid. And in my case, I've just graduated from university and I'm not in the best position to fund a civil court case. And if the police if the criminal case is not really progressing as you like and it's going too slow, you have no option but to take the civil court route. And that requires money and time. And I don't want to go through a long process where I'm just re-traumatizing myself and the abuser just, I mean, he can still do what he wants. And it's just difficult to even, I guess, for instance, give a restraining order or anything. So it's just been very frustrating.
Honestly, Lisa, it's so good to have you on this call to also get like the lived experience perspective in addition to all the speakers that like talk about it from a support perspective, from a research perspective. So really thank you. And I just want to say like we will follow up to all the attendees with like links to the things we've mentioned today. So hopefully that will be helpful. The last question, just because I know we're actually kind of out of time, is actually for Emma. Perhaps you could briefly address that and then we officially close the session.
Okay, a really, really good question. I don't know who it came from, but a brilliant question. It was talking about, are we recording the incidences of cyber stalking and cyber abuse? I think I've got lots of answers. I think we are probably not recording accurately in terms of police figures, and some of that is about underreporting of crime generally, especially stalking and domestic abuse and coercive control. All of that section is often underreported, and especially by certain groups in society who feel underrepresented or feel they don't have a voice in that space. So I do think there's a problem there. We know there's underreporting. There may be moves to improve that with some of the online reporting platforms that are being trialed at the moment. I'm hopeful that they will be effective because accessibility is so much easier and there are less prohibitive factors to getting online to report a crime. So I'm hopeful that that will increase figures. I think we're relying too much on the transparency reports of commercial industry, tech industry, to actually tell us what's going on and what the numbers are. You know, these are private companies, they are businesses. And yes, I think corporate responsibility is enormous, but it concerns me we rely so much on them to get the accurate figures. Finally, I'd say the figures I tend to go to in terms of what I think might be most reliable is the British Crime Survey or the Crime Survey of England and Wales. There is a question in there about cyber abuse and online communications, and that's where I tend to go when I'm trying to keep abreast of what's happening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma, so much. And I know we're out of time, so I know we could probably, we could talk forever about this, and I'd be very keen, and I'm sure all of you would be. So hopefully there will be more opportunities in the future to bring up this intersection of like technology, violence, abuse, and mental health through other means, conferences, webinars in the future. But for now, I am glad to officially end today's session. I really want to say a huge thank you to all the speakers who kindly shared their time, their insights, their experiences with us. So a round of virtual applause to all of you for spending the lunchtime break with us. To everyone on the call, thank you so much for joining. We really hope it was useful and insightful and has brought some points for consideration. We will follow up with the recording and the slides and all the resources that we mentioned and shared today in an email. And for those of you interested in learning more about the network and getting involved, please do check out the website. We have bursaries, funding schemes, and other opportunities that some of you might want to get involved in. And please do also check out the links, the websites of all the speakers today. So with that, thank you all very, very much. Please stay safe, and hopefully more will happen in this space in the future. That will mean that people don't have to endure abuse online, but get the help through technology as it should be. Thank you.